My teacher refused to follow lockdown protocol during an actual school shooting. She even covered the light switch as the gunfire moved closer. When I pleaded with her to let us hide, she snapped, "Sit down or you're expelled." I froze. That happened a year ago. And last week, she was taken out of her apartment in handcuffs. I was sitting in Miss Brown's AP history class when the lockdown alert crackled through the PA. Can you imagine a teacher, someone you're supposed to trust with your life, looking you in the eye during an active shooter situation and telling you it's all a fake drill? What the hell would you do if your life and the lives of your friends depended on defying her? That day started like any other. The routine lockdown. Lockdown. "This is not a drill," came over the intercom. We'd practiced it 100 times since kindergarten. Lights off, hide in the corner, stay quiet. Simple. Everyone moved automatically, a silent choreography of survival. But then Miss Brown stepped in front of us. She had that look, you know, the one that screams, "Don't you dare question me." Her voice was razor sharp. "Get back to your desks now." I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. I raised my hand out of habit. "But Miss Brown, we're supposed to." She cut me off, her eyes flashing. "The only procedures you follow are mine. Sit down or you're all getting zeros on your presentations." Then came her classic, "I've been teaching for 25 years" speech. The one about respect, about how her generation didn't need constant hand-holding. Look, Miss Brown was a trip. She was obsessively strict about the weirdest things. 30 seconds late and you were marked absent, but totally checked out when it came to actual teaching. She'd hand out A's on essays she clearly hadn't even glanced at. I once turned in a paper with a whole paragraph about SpongeBob in the middle, just to test her. Got a 98. So, most of us just slumped back into our seats. Nobody wanted to risk their GPA over what was probably just another stupid drill. But then the announcement repeated, louder, more urgent. Code red. "This is a code red. All staff and students follow lockdown procedures immediately." That never happens in drills. Never. My stomach did that sickening flip, you know? Like the feeling before a huge test you didn't study for, only 1,000 times worse. My eyes kept darting to the door. The hallway was still bathed in the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. In drills, teachers always killed the lights immediately. Always. Then I heard it. A pop. Like firecrackers, but not. And suddenly, every single phone in the room buzzed at once. I snatched mine from under my desk. My boyfriend, Tyler, was in chemistry, 2 halls over. His text made my blood run cold, freezing me from the inside out. Hiding in supply closet. "Someone has a gun. Where are you?" More texts flooded in. Behind filing cabinet in main office, under Mr. Garcia's desk. I shoved my phone at Miss Brown. My voice was trembling. "My boyfriend says there's someone with a—" She barely glanced at the screen, her expression turning into this twisted, smug certainty. "I see what's happening here. You think you can stage some elaborate prank to get me in trouble? Get me fired." The popping sounds were louder now. Closer. And then a scream from the hallway. Not a playful scream. Not a just kidding scream. This was pure, unadulterated terror. "That's probably drama class practicing," Ms. Brown insisted, but even her voice wavered. I could see Mr. Peterson's classroom across the hall. Lights out. No movement. Just darkness where 20 kids should have been. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely type. "Henderson won't let us hide. Still at desks." Tyler's reply was instant. "What? Get to safety now." Ben, sweet Ben, who never argued with anyone, tried next. "Ms. Brown, please. This feels real." Her response was chilling. "Feelings aren't facts. Ben, sit down." More running. A frantic stampede in the hallway. All feet going the same direction. Away. Away from something or someone. The PA crackled again, cutting off mid-word. And then it happened. The shots. Not pops anymore. Bang. Bang. Bang! It was like someone slamming a metal door, but sharper, louder, sickeningly real. I stood up. "We need to hide now." "Sit down, or you're expelled." Miss Brown moved to block the light switch, her face a mask of furious control. "I will not lose my job because you children want to play games." Something in me just snapped. "I don't care." I didn't even think. I just sprinted for the lights. That's when chaos erupted. Half the class, spurred by a primal instinct, rushed for the safe corner. The other half froze, torn between a lifetime of following rules and that ancient, screaming voice inside them yelling, "Danger!" Ms. Brown grabbed at my arm as I flew past, but I yanked away. She was screaming about disrespect, about consequences. "You're all being hysterical. This paranoia is exactly what social media has done to you. Manufactured fear." But we weren't listening anymore. Desks scraped violently across the linoleum as we shoved them against the door, barricading it. Someone was crying, soft, desperate sobs. Someone else was praying. The kids who'd frozen finally scrambled over, cramming into our corner. 23 terrified teenagers trying to become invisible. Everyone except Ms. Brown. She stood at her desk, arms crossed, fury radiating off her like heat. The doorknob rattled. My breath caught. The handle turned. It was locked. Thank God. Locked. A shadow passed under the door, then paused. We could hear breathing on the other side. Or maybe that was just my own heart, hammering so loud in my ears it felt like it would burst. Footsteps moved on. Those were the longest 10 seconds of my entire life. The SWAT team found us 40 minutes later. 40 minutes. Ms. Brown was still babbling, insisting we'd overreacted to a simple drill. And a week later, we finally found out why she was so adamant. That's when they told us who the shooter was. Jake Wilson, from my sophomore English class. The quiet kid who sat in the back corner, always drawing anime characters in his notebook. A paramedic wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, out on the gurney. My whole body was shaking like I had hypothermia, even though it was May. She kept checking my pulse, asking if I could breathe, but all I could think about was Jake walking past our door. Jake with a gun. Jake, who I'd lent a pencil to last week. Detective Santos showed up, badge out, notebook ready. She crouched down, eye level, asking me to walk her through everything that happened in Miss Brown's room. I told her about the announcement, about Miss Brown making us stay at our desks, about the sounds getting closer. She wrote it all down, nodding when I mentioned turning off the lights myself. The parking lot was pure chaos. Parents running, screaming names. News vans everywhere. Ambulances pulling away, sirens wailing. Mom crashed through the police tape, still in her hospital scrubs, mascara streaking her face. She grabbed me so hard I couldn't breathe, touching my face, my arms, checking for injuries that weren't there, demanding answers from the detective about how a teacher could keep kids exposed during an active shooter. Tyler's mom was there too, hugging him over and over, while he just stood there, looking completely blank. Detective Santos led me to a quieter spot and pulled out her tablet. Screenshots of my texts to Tyler flashed across the screen. "Henderson won't let us hide." She said 23 students had given the same story, that Miss Brown kept insisting it was fake, even after the gunshots. 2 kids died in the math hallway, she told me, her voice heavy. 3 more are in the hospital, all from rooms that followed protocol immediately, except for one girl who got grazed by a bullet that went through a door. Dad showed up, taking over from Mom. He led me to his truck without saying a word. The radio stayed off the whole drive home. We both jumped when a motorcycle roared past at a red light. Our house felt wrong. Too normal. The smell of coffee and laundry detergent. Dad made spaghetti, but I just pushed it around my plate. My phone kept buzzing with messages. Everyone asking, "Why didn't Miss Brown let you hide?" That night, I couldn't sleep. Those 40 minutes replayed in my head, over and over. The next morning, an automated call from the district said school was canceled indefinitely. Counselors available at the community center. Mom called in sick, staying home with me, but I locked my bedroom door. I just sat there, thinking about how we almost didn't barricade, how we almost stayed at our desks like Miss Brown wanted. Channel 8 had our school on every commercial break. And then Miss Brown's face filled the screen, standing in her driveway, telling the reporter she'd maintained control during chaos, and her students were alive because she didn't panic. Mom grabbed the remote and threw it so hard it cracked the TV screen. Tyler sent me a link. Someone's cell phone video from Mr. Peterson's dark classroom. Everyone hidden, silent. And Miss Brown's voice, clear as day, carrying through the walls, talking about manufactured fear. The timestamp? 2:47 p.m., exactly when she was blocking the light switch in our room. The video had 50,000 views in 2 hours. The comments were brutal. I spent the next day in my room, jumping at every creak of the house, every car door slamming outside. Mom brought soup I didn't touch. The group chat blew up about lawyers and lawsuits, but I couldn't focus. Principal Foster called that evening, his voice careful and strained, saying the district needed my written statement about Miss Brown's actions, separate from the police investigation. Mom grabbed the phone, telling him I'd provide it through our attorney, which was news to me. The next morning, Ben's mom drove him over. He needed to talk to someone who was there, someone who understood. We sat on my front porch, and he kept starting sentences he couldn't finish, about almost staying in his seat, about what would have happened if I hadn't turned off those lights. His hands were shaking just like mine. Tyler's parents dropped him off later. We went straight to the picnic table under the big oak tree in the backyard. He rolled up his jeans, showing me the dark purple bruises covering both his knees from wedging himself behind chemical storage shelves. His voice was flat, hollow, telling me how the shots kept getting closer, and he knew I was 2 halls away, but couldn't do anything. We sat there for an hour, not really talking about it, but not talking about anything else either. His fingers picked at the splintered wood. 5 days in, Mom was on the phone, scheduling appointments. By noon, she'd found Rebecca Thompson, a lawyer specializing in school safety cases. Her downtown office walls were covered in newspaper clippings, headlines about negligence lawsuits, safety violations. Rebecca looked at Mom's notes and said, "What Miss Brown did went beyond poor judgment. Keeping students exposed during an active shooter situation was criminal endangerment." She paused, her gaze distant. There's something unsettling about how Miss Brown keeps insisting this is all fake, even with gunshots echoing through the halls. What makes a teacher so convinced that actual danger isn't real when every other classroom is already dark and hidden? She explained how other families were already filing civil suits, but criminal charges were up to the district attorney. The community meeting, 6 days after, turned into total chaos. The second Miss Brown walked through the civic center doors with her union rep, parents erupted, screaming. She just stood there with that same controlled expression she'd had during the shooting, repeating that she'd followed her professional judgment. Someone threw a water bottle that splattered against the wall behind her. Security guards had to form a circle around her, escorting her back outside. The detective called that same night. Her question made my whole body go cold. Had Miss Brown ever mentioned Jake Wilson in class? He'd been her student 3 years ago. Jake Wilson. The name everyone knew through whispers and group texts, but the news wouldn't say yet. The 7th day. Morning. I finally made myself shower and change out of the clothes I'd been wearing for days. Dad stood at the stove, making pancakes like any other Sunday. We both jumped when the doorbell rang. Just the delivery guy dropping off a package. But that split second of panic? It was becoming our new normal. That evening, the news finally confirmed what everyone already knew, showing Jake's yearbook photo. The quiet kid I vaguely remembered from freshman year. But the anchor dropped the real bomb. Wilson had filed a formal complaint against teacher Patricia Brown 3 years ago for psychological abuse. Mom snatched her phone, calling our lawyer. Dad was already hunting through online records. We found a school board meeting transcript from 2021 mentioning a sealed student complaint against staff, with dates that matched perfectly, even though Miss Brown's name wasn't listed. 8 days after, Tyler picked me up, and we drove to the empty mall parking lot. We just sat there, engine off. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Finally, he whispered, she knew. She had to know it might be him, and she still kept us all exposed. Ben started texting our class group chat with information his parents had found. 3 other students from Jake's graduating class remembered Miss Brown having it out for him. This girl, Melissa, said Miss Brown had failed Jake on a technicality that almost cost him graduation. The stories painted a clear, disturbing pattern of targeting certain students. 9 days. The detective showed up at our house, a court order for Miss Brown's personnel file clutched in her hand. She told Mom they'd found something. Jake wasn't the only complaint against Miss Brown over her career. There were 6 others, all sealed, all somehow resolved without any action. She needed my detailed statement, Miss Brown's exact words during the lockdown. Every single thing she'd said while we begged her to let us hide. I sat at our kitchen table, the detective's blank statement form in front of me, my pen hovering. Mom made coffee in the background. The first line asked for a description of events. I wrote 3 words, crossed them out. Started again. Crossed that out too. How do you put into words the way someone's voice changes when they've been in charge for so long they can't imagine being wrong? The detective waited patiently as I tried 6 different ways to explain how Miss Brown stood there, blocking the light switch, while we heard those shots getting closer. Finally, I just wrote exactly what she said and did, step by step. No opinions, just facts. 10 days. My phone buzzed with a news alert while I ate breakfast. The school board had placed Miss Brown on administrative leave, pending investigation. It sounded good, until I read the teachers' union statement underneath, calling it a rush to judgment against a dedicated educator with 25 years of service. The comments section was already at 300 posts, half calling her a hero for maintaining order, half calling for her arrest. Mom slammed my laptop shut, telling me to stop reading, but I'd already seen my name mentioned 14 times. That afternoon, Principal Foster showed up at our door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He sat on our couch, staring at his hands, telling Mom about the complaints over the years. Parents saying Miss Brown was too rigid, too harsh, but she had tenure, and her students got good test scores, so nothing ever happened. His voice cracked when he mentioned the 2 kids who didn't make it out. 11 days. My phone exploded at 6 a.m. Someone had leaked Jake's manifesto to a news site before the FBI could lock it down. 3 whole pages about Miss Brown. How she failed him on his senior thesis over a missing footnote. How that 1 grade kept him out of his dream college. How she laughed when he asked for a chance to fix it. The details made my skin crawl. Dates, times, conversations he'd secretly recorded, building his case for why she deserved what was coming. Our lawyer, Rebecca, called an emergency meeting that night. All 23 families from Miss Brown's classroom crammed into a conference room at the Holiday Inn. She stood at the front with a stack of papers and dropped the bomb. The school district knew about Jake's fixation on Miss Brown. His therapist had sent a warning 2 months before the shooting. The room erupted, parents shouting, crying, demanding answers, while Rebecca tried to explain about mandatory reporting laws and liability. 12 days. I woke up to 47 Instagram notifications. Miss Brown had gone on some podcast called Truth in Education and spent an hour painting herself as the victim of woke culture and teenage hysteria. She actually used my full name, called me a troubled student with attendance issues, twisted my grandmother's funeral into me skipping class for fun. The host kept agreeing with her, saying, "Kids today are soft, can't handle structure, need safe spaces instead of real education." Rebecca filed a cease and desist within 2 hours, but the episode had already been downloaded 12,000 times. My Instagram filled with strangers calling me a liar, an attention seeker, a crisis actor. Someone found Mom's work number at the hospital and started calling the nurse's station, asking if she was proud of raising a daughter who destroys teachers' lives. 13 days. Tyler came over with his sleeping bag. He sat up on my bedroom floor because neither of us could handle being alone anymore. We lay there in the dark at 3 a.m., both wide awake, staring at nothing. He kept going over that day, how he could have pulled the fire alarm from the chemistry room, how that would have evacuated everyone before Jake even started. The what-ifs were eating us both alive. There was nothing to say that would make it better. Meanwhile, Miss Brown's husband, who sold real estate all over town, started a GoFundMe for her legal defense the next morning. It hit $30,000 in 6 hours. The description called this a witch hunt against a dedicated teacher, including photos of her at graduations with former students who became doctors and lawyers, carefully leaving out anyone who didn't fit the narrative. People from 3 states away were donating, leaving comments about how liberals are destroying education. 14 days. Ben's mom called, her voice shaking. She said they were pulling out of the group legal action. Ben's dad's construction company had just lost 3 major contracts, no explanation. She kept saying they couldn't prove it was connected, but everyone knew Miss Brown's brother-in-law ran the biggest development firm in town and golfed with half the city council. Later that afternoon, Daniel Harris from my grade found me at the coffee shop, his phone already out, shaking in his hand as he slid into the seat across from me. He'd been hiding in the main office during everything, pressed behind the secretary's desk where he could see the security monitor. He'd recorded the whole thing on his phone without even thinking about it. The video was grainy, but clear enough to see Miss Brown walking down the hallway 30 seconds after the first shots. Not running, not ducking, just walking like it was any other day between classes, while Mr. Peterson's door was already barricaded, and Mrs. Garcia had her kids hiding under desks. Daniel forwarded it to Detective Santos right there in front of me, his fingers moving so fast they kept missing buttons. 15 days. I went back to therapy for the first time since middle school when my parents got divorced. Dr. Patel's office had the same fake plants, beige walls, and that white noise machine that was supposed to be calming but just made me think of static. I told her about the shadow under the door and how I still hear Miss Brown saying we're being hysterical while people were dying down the hall. She wrote notes on her yellow pad, asking me to describe what I felt in my body when I remembered it. Daniel's video hit Twitter before dinner that same day. By midnight, #BrownNew was trending with 40,000 retweets. People kept slowing it down, zooming in, showing her checking her phone while other teachers were dragging kids into classrooms. The timestamp was clear as day. This was after the shooting started. News vans showed up at Daniel's house. His parents had to take him to stay with his aunt in Boston. 16 days. Detective Santos called me in to look at the footage with a specialist from the state. She kept pointing at the screen with her pen. She showed me how there was no startle response when the shots went off. No surprise on Miss Brown's face. Just this calm decision to keep walking. They were building a case for willful endangerment, she said, which could mean up to 5 years in prison. Mom picked me up from the station and drove straight to the district office where she filled out the paperwork to pull me out for homeschooling. Miss Brown walking calmly down the hall while other teachers barricaded doors is the kind of detail that makes lawyers rub their hands together and insurance companies reach for their checkbooks. She took 3 weeks of vacation time she'd been saving for years, telling me she didn't care about my college applications. She cared about me being alive. We both ended up crying in the kitchen while the pasta boiled over on the stove. 17 days. Miss Brown's lawyer held this big press conference on the courthouse steps. 3 of her former students stood behind him in suits. One was a state senator now, talking about rushing to judgment, promising to investigate the investigation. The lawyer claimed the video was doctored, demanding independent analysis. Tyler's parents didn't wait. They transferred him to St. Mary's private school the same day. His mom explained they couldn't wait for the system to sort this out. He texted me constantly from his new school, feeling guilty, even though I kept telling him to get out while he could. Our phones became this lifeline, both of us waking up at 3 a.m., texting just to make sure the other was still there. 18 days. I couldn't sleep again, so I started Googling Miss Brown. I found this old Reddit thread from 2019 where someone asked, "Who is your worst teacher?" 3 different accounts mentioned her by name, talking about her mind games, how she'd pick one student each year to torment. The thread had been deleted, but the cached version was still there on the Wayback Machine. I screenshot everything and sent it to our lawyer. 19 days. The school board meeting turned into utter chaos. Parents screamed at each other across the auditorium. Half wanted Miss Brown arrested immediately. The other half thought she was being scapegoated. One woman yelled that Miss Brown saved those kids by maintaining order. Ben's dad stood up, even though they'd pulled out of the lawsuit, and shouted back that she nearly got them all killed. Security had to clear the whole room while people were still pushing and shoving in the parking lot. Rebecca, Daniel's mom, filed for a restraining order the next morning after Miss Brown's supporters started showing up at our houses, taking photos of our front doors and posting them online with our addresses. The judge said without direct threats, it was just free speech. Rebecca sat in the courtroom, crying while the judge explained that taking pictures from public property wasn't illegal. That same night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through my phone, looking at all the comments defending Miss Brown. Around 3 a.m., something inside me just snapped. I grabbed my laptop and started pulling up the audio recordings from that day that the news had released. The timeline was public record now, thanks to the investigation. I synced up Miss Brown's exact words with the sounds of gunshots in the background. Setting up my phone against my desk lamp, I hit record and just started reading from the transcript. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. Bang, echoed from my laptop speakers. Sit down or you're all getting zeros. Bang, bang. My hands are shaking, but I kept going through every single thing she said while kids were dying down the hall. When I posted it to TikTok at 4:17 a.m., I didn't expect anything. By noon, it had 2 million views and climbing fast. Other kids from school started making their own videos showing what their teachers did. Mrs. Garcia from Spanish had everyone under desks in 8 seconds. Mr. Peterson had his whole class in the storage closet before the second announcement. Coach Williams literally carried 2 freshmen who froze into the equipment room. Every single teacher except Miss Brown had their students hidden within 30 seconds. The hashtags exploded across every platform. Hashtag Teachers Save Students showed heroes, while hashtag Brown Chose Control showed our classroom still sitting at desks while gunshots echoed. That night, around 2 a.m., Tyler showed up at my house without warning. His mom had found him having a panic attack in his bathroom and drove him over. We sat in my driveway until the sun came up, sharing earbuds and listening to old playlists from before everything changed. He kept whispering the same thing over and over like a prayer. The district attorney's office called a press conference the next morning. 23 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor, 1 for each student in our class. Miss Brown turned herself in, wearing a navy suit with all her teaching awards pinned to her jacket like medals. The cameras caught every second as she walked up those courthouse steps, chin high, a little smile on her face. Her bail hearing happened that afternoon, set at $50,000. Her supporters had a GoFundMe running before she even got processed. 2 hours and 17 minutes was all it took to raise the full amount. She walked out of that courthouse, still smiling, stopping right in front of the cameras. Mom had to grab both my arms and physically drag me back to the car when Miss Brown started talking about vindication and control. The victims' families started meeting at the community center on Wednesdays, but I couldn't make myself go. Mom went instead and came back with puffy eyes every single time. She'd just hold me extra tight and not say anything about what she heard there. Ben texted me a photo of something his mom found while cleaning out old PDA files from her garage. Jake Wilson's junior year essay with Miss Brown's comments all over it in red pen. The essay looked fine to me, but her notes were brutal about lazy thinking and disappointing effort. At the bottom, in her perfect handwriting, she'd written a note about discussing his future in her course. Detective Santos called me the next day, saying they'd found 6 more complaints against Miss Brown going back 15 years, all from male students, all mentioning something the parents called psychological manipulation. Every single complaint got dropped after closed-door meetings with administration. The detective sounded tired when she told me this wasn't unusual in cases like this. Principal Foster resigned at an emergency press conference nobody expected. He stood at that podium and actually admitted he failed us. He said Miss Brown should have been removed years ago, but he chose the easy path instead. The reporters seemed shocked that someone was actually taking responsibility for once. 2 days later, Miss Brown's lawyer filed a countersuit against the school district for $5 million. They claimed the district was scapegoating her for their own security failures. My phone buzzed with the news alert while I was in my therapist's waiting room, and I actually laughed out loud at the audacity. The next day, Rebecca called a meeting at the community center. All 23 families showed up. She stood at the front with stacks of papers, handing them out, explaining we weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were filing criminal complaints with the state board and launching a federal civil rights lawsuit. Parents were signing papers, exchanging phone numbers, while Rebecca's assistant took notes on her laptop. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I started writing everything down in this old notebook I found in my desk drawer. Every word Miss Brown said during those 47 minutes went on the page. The way she blocked the light switch, how she threatened us with zeros and expulsion while gunshots got closer. Dr. Patel said writing helps process trauma, but it felt more like building a case. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications about this new website. A group of Miss Brown's former students had created something called Survivors of Room 203. I clicked the link and saw testimonial after testimonial pouring in. 37 stories in the first few days alone. Kids from 10 years ago describing the same tactics. Public humiliation when you questioned her. Grades mysteriously dropping if you challenged her authority. Mind games that made you doubt yourself. The pattern was right there for everyone to see. A local reporter reached out, through my mom, asking if I'd do an interview. My hands were shaking when the camera started rolling, but I kept my voice steady and told them exactly what happened, how she looked at us while gunshots echoed in the hallway and chose her authority over our lives. The segment aired that evening, and my phone didn't stop buzzing for hours. Ben surprised everyone the next day by posting his own story on Instagram, despite his parents begging him not to. He wrote about almost staying seated because he was more afraid of Miss Brown's punishment than dying. He said, "I saved his life by defying her." Within 3 hours, his post had 10,000 shares and climbing. The FBI agent called my parents that afternoon with new information they'd uncovered. Jake had texted a friend the night before the shooting about Miss Brown, destroying him in front of everyone. The friend had deleted the messages out of guilt, but investigators recovered them from the phone company servers. The texts were explicit about Jake's plans and his specific hatred for Miss Brown. 2 days later, news broke that Miss Brown's husband had filed for divorce and moved out in the middle of the night. Court documents showed he'd been planning it for months, but the shooting pushed up his timeline. Even her own husband was abandoning ship. I had to go back to school to get my stuff since the semester was ending. Room 203 was still sealed with crime, scene tape across the door. The hallway felt wrong and smelled like industrial cleaner trying to cover something else. I grabbed my things from my locker as fast as I could, while Tyler waited in the parking lot with the car running. The prosecution brought in this expert named Dr. Catherine Mills, who specialized in crisis response. She spent 3 days reviewing everything, and her conclusion was brutal. Miss Brown violated every single established protocol and showed gross negligence that directly endangered our lives. Her report was 50 pages of professional language, basically saying Miss Brown chose control over children. Then Miss Brown's supporters decided to organize a rally at the courthouse, which turned into a disaster. Parents of the 2 students who died showed up as counter-protesters. When someone yelled that Brown did nothing wrong, one of the mothers just collapsed, sobbing on the courthouse steps. The photo went viral within minutes, showing our town completely divided. News fans from 3 states away started showing up. Tyler's mom organized a support group meeting at the community center that weekend. 23 of us survivors gathered in a circle of folding chairs. The girl from Mr. Peterson's class kept twisting her hair around her finger while she talked about how their teacher immediately flipped desks to make a barrier. Another kid from the science wing described his teacher pulling them into the chemical storage room and blocking the door with a filing cabinet. Everyone had the same story except us. Their teachers protected them. Ours tried to get us killed. One girl just looked at me and said, "We shouldn't have had to save ourselves," and everyone nodded. The State Board of Education finally launched their investigation 35 days after, when the media pressure got too intense. Rebecca called me that afternoon to say they were subpoenaing 10 years of records from the school district. She said the investigators found 17 formal complaints against Mrs. Brown that were never properly documented. Criminal charges against the administrators who covered for her were now on the table. Mom arranged dinner with Tyler's family that night. We all sat around their dining room table, pushing food around our plates. Tyler's dad kept trying to talk about his college plans for next year, but the words just hung there. His mom mentioned summer vacation ideas, but stopped mid-sentence when a car backfired outside and we all jumped. We were all pretending we weren't different now, that loud noises didn't make us freeze, that shadows didn't make our hearts race. On day 40, I found myself at the state capitol building, a microphone in front of me, 300 people in the audience. The legislative committee sat behind their long desk, taking notes, while I read from my prepared statement. I told them Miss Brown weaponized her authority while a weapon was in our school. I said she chose her ego over our lives. I asked how many complaints it takes before someone acts. The representatives just stared at me when I finished. 2 days later, a custodian named Frank contacted our lawyer with something huge. He had security footage from 3 years ago that nobody knew existed because it was from an old camera system they forgot to disconnect. The video showed Jake leaving Miss Brown's classroom with tears streaming down his face before punching a wall so hard his knuckles bled. The timestamp matched exactly with the day Jake filed his complaint against her. The original investigation never included this footage because nobody thought to check the old system. Ben's family called us on day 42 to say they were rejoining the lawsuit. His dad's company mysteriously got all those contracts back the same day the FBI started investigating Miss Brown's brother-in-law for witness tampering. His dad said some things are more important than money, but we all knew the truth. The brother-in-law backed down when federal agents showed up at his office. The grand jury met the next week and upgraded Miss Brown's charges to attempted murder through depraved indifference. Her lawyer went on the news calling it prosecutorial overreach, but the DA held a press conference explaining that keeping children exposed during an active shooter situation showed extreme disregard for human life. Legal experts on TV said this charge usually only applies to drunk driving deaths, but this case might set a new precedent. Tyler got his early admission letter to State University on day 8:45, but called them that afternoon to defer for a gap year. He came over that night. We sat on my porch while he explained he couldn't leave me to face the trial alone. We both knew what we had wasn't normal teenage stuff anymore. We were connected by something darker now, something that went beyond love into shared survival. Day 47 was my first good day since the shooting. I went 6 whole hours without thinking about it while helping Mom reorganize the garage. Then the guilt hit me like a truck. How could I forget, even for a minute, when 2 kids were dead? Dr. Patel said healing isn't linear during our session, but it felt like betrayal. It felt like I was abandoning the kids who didn't make it out. The state board held their hearing on day 50 to revoke Miss Brown's teaching license. She showed up in a black suit, claiming this was a lynching of a dedicated educator. When they showed her testimonials from 37 former students describing her behavior, she called them weak children who couldn't handle high standards. Several board members visibly pulled back from their microphones. The woman running the hearing had to call for order twice when Miss Brown started yelling about cancel culture. They voted unanimously to revoke her license permanently and referred the case to the Attorney General for additional charges related to child endangerment spanning her entire career. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and therapy sessions until Detective Santos called me on day 52 with news that made my hands shake so bad I dropped my phone. She'd been digging through old personnel files at the district office when she found a sealed folder from 2009 about Miss Brown's transfer from Westfield High. A student there had tried to kill herself and left a 3-page note naming Miss Brown specifically for the daily humiliation and mind games that pushed her to that point. The school quietly moved Miss Brown to our district rather than investigate because the superintendent's wife was Miss Brown's cousin. Within hours of Detective Santos leaking this to a reporter friend, my phone started blowing up with notifications from a Facebook group called Survivors of Patricia Brown that already had 200 members. Former students from 3 different schools were sharing stories going back 25 years about her tactics, the public shaming, the way she'd give contradictory instructions, then punish kids for being confused, how she'd gaslight students about things she'd said minutes earlier. One girl from 1998 wrote that Miss Brown told her she was too stupid for college in front of the whole class, then denied it when her parents complained. Another kid from 2003 said Miss Brown made him stand in front of the class while she listed everything wrong with his essay, including mocking his stutter. The pattern was always the same, always protected by administrators who found it easier to transfer her than deal with complaints. 2 days later, my mom drove me to meet the Johnsons and the Garcias, whose kids, Michael and Sophia, died in the shooting because they stayed at their desks, following Miss Brown's orders. Mrs. Johnson held my hand while tears rolled down her face and said she didn't blame any of us survivors. Mr. Garcia's voice cracked when he told me we fought to save ourselves while their children never got the chance because they followed the rules. We sat in their living room, crying together for an hour, looking at photos of Michael and Sophia at prom just 3 weeks before they died. Rebecca called that afternoon with updates on the prosecution strategy, and what she told me made me run to the bathroom to throw up. They had evidence. Miss Brown knew Jake was likely targeting her based on previous incidents where he'd confronted her after class. But she deliberately kept us exposed as a form of psychological torture. The prosecutors were going to argue she used us as human shields for her ego, that she'd rather risk our lives than admit she was wrong about the lockdown. The truth was more horrifying than any of us imagined. She saw us as props in her power game, even with a shooter in the building. By day 56, the school district's lawyers were in full panic mode. They offered a $30 million settlement divided among all the families, admitting no wrongdoing but acknowledging failures and oversight. Some families took it immediately because they couldn't afford years of legal battles, but my parents and 12 other families held out for criminal justice, not just money. Tyler picked me up 2 days later to visit the memorial that had grown outside the school. Hundreds of flowers, teddy bears, photos covering the front steps. Someone had left a copy of the student handbook with the lockdown procedures highlighted in yellow, a note attached that said, "These rules save lives when teachers follow them." We stood there, holding hands, reading all the messages people had left, when Tyler spotted something that made him squeeze my fingers so hard it hurt. Between two bouquets was a printed copy of Jake's manifesto that the defense teams had just gotten access to. 5 pages detailing Miss Brown's teaching methods, like a psychological torture manual. He documented the public humiliation, the deliberately confusing instructions, followed by punishment for not listening, the gaslighting about things she'd said or done. Example after example with dates and witnesses. The FBI had verified every incident he described through interviews with former students. That same week, Miss Brown's former teaching assistant from 2015 finally broke her silence in an interview with the local news. She'd quit after 1 semester because she couldn't watch what Miss Brown did to students anymore, had even reported it to Principal Foster. But nothing was done because Miss Brown had tenure, and the union would fight any disciplinary action. Another administrator who chose the easy path over protecting kids. Another adult who could have stopped this years ago. Ben's deposition happened on day 62. His parents sent me the transcript later because they were so proud of how strong he was. His voice apparently never wavered when he said, "Miss Brown taught us that authority was more important than safety. But that day I taught everyone that survival is the only thing that matters." The prosecutor asked if he blamed me for defying Miss Brown. And Ben said I was the only adult in that room who acted like one, that a 17-year-old girl showed more leadership than a woman with 25 years of teaching experience. The FBI showed up at Miss Brown's brother-in-law's house the next morning with a warrant for witness tampering and obstruction of justice after they caught him on a wiretap threatening Ben's dad's business partners if Ben didn't change his testimony. Her whole support network was crumbling as people realized the lengths she'd gone to protect herself, hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on students' families, having her brother-in-law pressure anyone who might testify against her. 2 weeks later, I sat at our kitchen table with Rebecca, the prosecutor, spreading out pages of notes for my victim impact statement. She pushed a legal pad toward me and told me not to hold back, because the jury needed to understand everything Miss Brown did that day. Tyler sat next to me, his hand on my knee under the table, while I wrote about how she kept us at our desks while a shooter walked the halls. I wrote until my hand cramped, then typed on my laptop, then wrote some more. The words came out angry at first, then sad, then just tired. Rebecca read through my draft and nodded, telling me this would help the jury see the truth. 2 days later, the court clerk called. The trial was set for 3 months out. 3 whole months of waiting. I tried going back to normal stuff, like SAT prep and college applications. But how do you write about your future goals when you almost didn't have a future at all? The Common App essay prompt asked about a challenge I'd overcome, and I just stared at the blank page for hours. Then, on day 70, my phone blew up with text from Ben. Miss Brown had sent an email to his parents saying their son was confused about what happened and suggesting they get him therapy to help him remember correctly. The prosecutor had her arrested within 2 hours. News vans showed up at her house and caught her being let out in handcuffs while she yelled about being persecuted for maintaining order. The judge called an emergency hearing the next morning. I sat in the gallery watching as the prosecutor showed the email and explained how Miss Brown had violated her bail conditions by contacting witnesses. The judge didn't even let her lawyer finish his argument before revoking her bail. Court officers moved toward her, and she stood up fast, knocking over her water glass. For the first time since this all started, I saw real fear in her eyes as they cuffed her. She looked right at me as they led her past the gallery, and I could see it hit her. She wasn't in control anymore. 2 nights later, Mom found me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., surrounded by college essay drafts. My Common App essay was about the day I chose to survive despite my teacher's orders. Mom read over my shoulder and said I didn't have to write about this if it was too hard. I told her I did because this was who I was now. We both knew I'd never be the person I was before that day. The trial started 3 months later on a cold Monday morning. The prosecutor's opening statement included playing the audio from my phone that I'd been recording for a class project. You could hear the shots getting closer, students crying, and Miss Brown's voice, clear as day, saying we were being hysterical and manufacturing fear. Several jurors put their hands over their mouths. Miss Brown sat at the defense table in a gray suit, still acting like she was the victim. The next day, I testified for 4 straight hours. The prosecutor walked me through every second of those 47 minutes, having me describe where everyone was sitting, what Miss Brown said, how she blocked the light switch. Her lawyer tried to make me look like some rebellious kid who just didn't like authority. But I stayed calm and just kept repeating the facts. When he asked why I defied a teacher's direct order, I looked at the jury and said, I chose to live while she chose her ego. Nobody said anything for like 10 seconds. On day 3, Tyler took the stand. He talked about getting my texts about hiding in that supply closet, knowing I was in danger. His voice cracked when he described the moment he thought I was dead because I stopped responding. Miss Brown's lawyer objected, calling it emotional manipulation, but the judge said the jury needed to understand the trauma she caused by keeping students exposed. Tyler had to take 3 breaks to compose himself. Day 4 changed everything. The prosecution had enhanced the security footage audio using some FBI tech, and you could hear stuff we couldn't make out before. At timestamp 9:47 a.m., right after the first shots, Miss Brown's voice came through crystal clear, saying, if this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me. A juror actually gasped out loud. Even her own lawyer looked shocked, because this wasn't in any of the discovery materials. The judge had to call a recess when parents in the gallery started yelling. Day 5, Miss Brown decided to testify against her lawyer's advice. She sat in the witness box, insisting she maintained perfect order, that we were never in real danger, that she was being persecuted for having standards. She said she was protecting us from panic and that running around would have been more dangerous. The prosecutor let her talk for 20 minutes, then asked one question that made the whole courtroom go silent. Did you recognize Jake Wilson's voice when he was in the hallway outside your classroom? Miss Brown froze completely, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. After maybe 15 seconds, she whispered, yes. The courtroom exploded with people shouting and crying, and the judge had to bang his gavel over and over to get control. The prosecutor stood up slowly after things got quiet again and walked right up to Miss Brown's face. She asked the question everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to hear out loud. Did Miss Brown know it was Jake Wilson in that hallway? The same Jake Wilson who filed 3 complaints against her last year. Miss Brown's hand started shaking. Her face went from red to white to gray in about 5 seconds. The whole courtroom held its breath, waiting for her answer. Finally, she cracked and started yelling about how Jake needed to learn respect, just like all of us did. The jury members looked at each other with their mouths open, and one lady in the back row started crying. 3 weeks later, we all came back for verdict day. You could feel the tension like electricity in the air. The jury took 6 hours to decide, but when they came back, they found her guilty on everything. 23 counts of putting kids in danger, plus something called depraved indifference that sounded even worse. Miss Brown fell down in her chair when they read it, and for the first time, she looked scared instead of angry. The judge said she could get up to 25 years, and the families of the 3 kids who died started sobbing. 2 weeks after that, I had to read my victim impact statement at sentencing. My hands are sweating so bad I could barely hold the paper, but I made myself look at her while I talked. I told her she taught me that being in charge without being smart about it was dangerous, that trying to control people without caring about them was just being mean. I said I'd carry those 47 minutes with me forever, but she'd have to carry what she chose to do. The judge gave her 18 years with a chance for parole after 12. When the guards put the handcuffs on her, she turned to all of us and said she was just keeping standards. Even then, she didn't get it, and that was maybe the worst part of all. A month later, Tyler and I sat in his car, watching workers put in new metal detectors and cameras at school. We were different now, stuck together by what happened, but also just different inside. Tyler took my hand and said, "We survived." And this time it wasn't a question. Ben went to the school board meeting that spring and gave this amazing speech about fixing how they handled teacher complaints. His voice was strong and clear, nothing like the scared kid who almost stayed in his seat that day. He said, no student should have to pick between their grades and staying alive. I started at State University that fall, studying education policy, because somebody needs to fix this stuff. My roommate didn't know about what happened, and for a few weeks, I was just Brianna instead of the shooting girl. It felt good, but also weird, keeping that huge thing inside me. They reopened room 203 as a memorial classroom in November and asked me to speak at the ceremony. Standing where Miss Brown used to stand felt so strange, but I told everyone that protecting kids isn't just about locks and drills. It's about listening when they say something's wrong. Mom drove me home for winter break, and we passed the school where kids were playing basketball like nothing ever happened there. I told her they looked so young, and she said we all did back then. We both knew I'd never be that young again, because innocence was another thing that died that day. Tyler and I met at our old coffee shop when we were both home from college for the holidays. We still checked where the exits were and jumped when someone dropped a tray, but we were learning to live with it. Tyler held my hand and said we were writing new chapters now, which sounded cheesy but also true. The scars would always be there, but we were more than what happened in room 203. We were the kids who refused to stay in our seats when standing up meant staying alive. This whole journey, it changed me forever, but it also showed me what truly matters. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced something where you knew you had to defy authority to protect yourself or others? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to know.